So two people, there's Johannes Kepler and there's Tycho Brahe. If you notice, Brahe is old enough to be Kepler's dad. Yeah? Okay. What else do we know? Kepler came up with these laws. Brahe, when he came up with the laws, he based it on information that Brahe had gathered, okay, hours and hours and years of watching where the planets are at night, okay? Because planets are sort of a weird thing, right? Planets are these crazy things, and sometimes they move across the sky with the stars, and sometimes they actually move opposite the direction of the stars night by night. Like say you go out at night, every night at midnight, and look at the stars. Everything always shifts a bit to the left, and that's because the Earth, if you look south at midnight every night, okay, the Earth at that moment in its orbit is actually moving to the left, and the Earth is also, by the way, rotating to the left because of its rotation about its own axis, right? So it's normal for things in the sky to just every night be a little farther to the west than they were the night before. Yeah? That's kind of a crazy thing, right? Okay, now, planets are weird because sometimes planets are actually moving toward the east. Yeah? Every night they'll move toward the east, and of course that's because they're like the planets are moving around the sun as well as we are, right? Okay, and this was something that was very, very hard to explain. In fact, the Ptolemy model, the Ptolemaic model, Ptolemy's model was that everything goes around the Earth, and it was vastly complicated, right? The Copernican model is, of course, that it goes around is what we accept today, okay? And really, Copernicus's model didn't work until you actually got Kepler's laws, right? Until you actually had these elliptical orbits and everything that's about. Okay. Now let's just go back to Tycho Brahe, because Tycho Brahe is just this fun guy. Before we hit the right arrow and move away from Tycho Brahe, there's some things we have to know about Tycho Brahe. What do we know about Tycho Brahe? Yes.
He lost his nose in a duel and had a silver one.
He lost his nose in a duel and had a silver one. Yes. A friend of his cut his nose off. Why did he cut his nose off? Tycho Brahe. No, it wasn't. His nose was actually a pretty good looking nose by all counts before it got cut off. Yeah? It's like a mystery. His friend was doing him a favor. Yeah? Instead of killing him, instead of like, clash, whatever, right? His sword goes flying. This is Hollywood, right? His friend should have just gone, boom, and skewered him. Instead of skewering him, what his friend did was he said, look, you've got something on your shirt. When Brahe looked down, boom, cut his nose off. Right? Or something like that, wasn't it? Right? Okay. So he had, instead of having this big hole in your face, because if you don't have a nose, you've got this big ugly hole in your face, and people are like, they want to look at you when they talk to you, right? Okay. So instead of having a big hole in his face, he had a nose made of silver. Why silver? Why not copper? Wasn't copper good enough for him? Yeah, copper's reactive. You can't have a piece of copper in contact with your face in the same way you couldn't make copper earrings and wear them. Yes? Do we know this? There we go. Silver nose. Okay. So anyway, silver nose. And then he died.
Because his bladder exploded because he wasn't allowed to go to the restroom in King's Feast.
Yes. The King's Feast?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he really had to pee. And so to that end, that whole 15 minutes into class, 15 minutes before the end, if your bladder is going to explode, go. It's not worth dying for, because apparently you can die from a ruptured bladder. Okay, it's not common. Usually you just leak, but apparently your bladder can explode. Wouldn't that be terrible to die of an exploded bladder? I just hate that, right? Okay, wouldn't be fatal nowadays because they could probably fix you or something like that, right? Now, totally, because it's right before break, I'm going to tell you a totally unrelated story about somebody with no nose. No. This is a true story. Okay, so I'm working at this camp, and what you do is you teach the kids how to paddle canoes and load packs and navigate and all this stuff, right? And you spend about a day and a half in camp, and then they put you all your gear on these trailers, and then they truck you off someplace. And sometimes what they do is they drop you someplace and you paddle back to camp, or sometimes you paddle away from camp and come back to camp. The camp was actually in the boundary waters, or just on the edge of the boundary waters, right? And so the story was this. We had a camp trailer, and the camp trailer could carry 8 canoes. 8 canoes is enough canoes for 4 trail groups, because every trail group is 6 people, and 6 people can fit in 2 canoes, 3 people to a canoe. Yes? Okay? And so we loaded all 8 of our canoes onto the camp trailer, and the trailer goes behind the bus, and then the bus fits 4 trail groups. That's 24 people plus gear on the bus. So you picturing this? Ordinary school bus. If it's 45 people, can fit 24 people and all their gear. Are you picturing that? Right? This is standard practice, right? So there we are, and we load everything on the bus, and we start to go out of camp, and the back wheel of the trailer starts to go, like it's like not looking like it's going to drive 200 miles. It's looking like we would not make it out of the camp driveway because like the bearings are shot. Yes? Now what do we do? Well, the other trailer's already gone, and then another trailer I think was like being repaired already. So what do we do? Well, it turns out that you can lash 6 canoes to the top of a bus with bare ropes. Yes, you can. You've got to, and you tie the ropes all the way around, 50-foot bare ropes, right? You tie them all the way around through the windows, which means the windows don't shut all the way. Are you picturing this? Yeah, this is not a professional thing. Then you can tie a couple canoes on the top of a Suburban. Yeah? Yeah, Suburbans are big. You can get a couple canoes side by side on a Suburban. You can do it. They're big, right? So we do that. Now, instead of leaving at like 8 o'clock in the morning or something right after breakfast, we're now leaving at about noon. So instead of dropping people off like at night, like before it gets dark, they're dropping people off at like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. Yes? And what we do is we went up with it's a town called Denoric, Canada. So basically, here's Minnesota, right? Here's the Quetico Park, and then here's a road up there, right? And so we were dropping people like way up here in Canada, and there's a little town called Denoric, and the driver had never driven the route before. It was a perfect storm, right? The driver had never driven to this particular town, didn't know where to drop people off. In fact, we were actually dropped, some group was actually dropped by a sewage treatment lagoon that they thought was the place that they were supposed to be, and had to portage like 4 miles at the beginning of the trip, which really sucks because your packs are full of heavy stuff, right? They had to portage through town, you're like, to get to the water access, right? We were dropped, we camped in a park that said, like, no camping here. We were up before the Mounties got us, you know. But one group could not find the public water access in Denoric, Canada, right? Yes? So they saw this house with the lights on. There was somebody moving around in the house. This gets to the part where the guy doesn't have a nose, right? They see a guy walking around in this house. They can see him moving, right? And like, you know, you can't just ask for directions. It's before like anybody had an iPhone with like Google Maps on it, right? This is like the 80s, right? Okay, so they knock on the door. Guy comes to the door. He has no nose. The guy has no nose. Where his nose should be, he's got like a hole in his face. Now there's 2 things you can do when somebody comes to the door in the middle of the night when you've knocked on the door and they have no nose. The first thing is you can go, ah, and run away. That's not polite. The second thing you can do is, without staring at the hole in their face, you can say, how do you get to the public water access in Denoric, Canada? Right? So they did that. They said, how do you get to the public water access in Denoric, Canada? And the guy said, oh, it's simple. You've taken the wrong exit. You've got to take the second exit for Denoric. Okay, so go all the way back out to the main road, go back, take the next exit, keep going east, right? You're going to take that, it's going to take you right into town, take the first left, the first right, and then straight ahead, and it's there. How much of that did they remember? He had no nose. He had no nose. Okay, they remembered the part about going back out and whatever, and got them into town, drove around for a while, couldn't figure out where it was, dropped them basically, they just camped like out in a park somewhere, and then got up early in the morning and asked somebody where it was. They weren't too far. They were actually only like a mile or 2 from where they were supposed to be, right? Okay, what is that? It has nothing to do. Isn't that sort of funny though? Isn't that funny? A little bit funny, I don't know. Okay, so here's the deal. Kepler knew that Brahe had this data, and if he had the data, Kepler was a talented enough mathematician. I think one year I said magician. Okay, a talented enough mathematician that he could actually derive a general law from what Brahe had gathered. So basically he went to Brahe and he said, look, you're not talented enough to figure this out, so please give me all your data, and I will become famous. They will become my laws, okay? And you will become this humorous footnote in history. Yes?